think YouTube might. Oh no, never mind. I was going to say I think YouTube might have a waiting room now, so we know that now for next time, at least.
Are we good to go?
Yeah.
Still says practice session on mine.
Oh, one sec. Yeah, I'll do that now.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sinead McMahon and I am the Content Manager here at the Institute of Early Years Education. I'm joined today by my colleague, content writer Emily Askew. Here
Hello.
at the Institute, oh sorry Emily, here at the Institute we've been busy with the start of the new year and everything planned for 2025. Sorry. We've been busy with the start of the new year and everything planned for 2025. January is often the month for setting goals and getting things organised, which can make it feel like a hectic time. And we have already spent some time thinking about our goals for the new year in our previous webinar. But today we wanted to take some time just to think about how we can look to slow things down in our roles, especially when we're working with the children, and how can that benefit our practice and the children's learning. So there's lots of ways to think about slowing down within early education and care. Most commonly, we might ask children to use their walking feet or to slow down at hungry meal times and not rush their food, or maybe think more about their friends' feelings when making some quick decisions. But slowing down can mean so much more than that and can have wider impacts on our well-being, our relationships, and learning outcomes for the children in our care. So slowing down isn't always about the speed at which we're operating, like I've said, nor is it about the rates at which we learn, change or develop. It isn't necessarily about the ways in which we plan how to complete a unit of learning or the progression of a provision. Slow pedagogy, researched by Alison Clark, building upon the work of others in the field, refers to thinking about the value of the moment, appreciating the sense of feeling unhurried and appreciating the present. It's something that supports building relationships, not only with children, but also with other colleagues as well as parents and carers too. It infuses into practice a nurturing leadership capacity that pays attention to the individual, whilst also allowing children to feel heard in the space of their learning and development. So, Emily, I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit more on what it actually means for us to slow down, particularly when we think about slowing down in our practice with early years children.
Definitely. So when we're talking about slowing down, as we've said, it's not necessarily kind of a physical attribute. We're not asking children to slow down with their walking and running, or maybe kind of how quickly they're making decisions, although that does play a big part of the wider perspective. It's about valuing the present. So rather than thinking about an end goal or stage, it's about appreciating the moment that you're currently in. So this might look like appreciating the challenges and the resilience and perseverance of a child trying to put their wellies on for one of the first times, rather than focusing on the end reason of them putting those wellies on to go outside. You might consider it also as something of being in the moment, which is something that we already do through in the moment planning approaches that are commonly used in early years, which, if you haven't heard of before, is an approach where you are planning essentially as you go. You're following the child's interests, and instead of coming to a provision with a full kitted out plan of what you want to teach in each moment, with a specific outcome, the teachable moment is recognised as that quality interaction arises. So it allows the child to build upon their natural curiosities, and for you as an educator to really provide those meaningful ways to focus on that child's interest and maximise that moment and the child's engagement within it. It also involves being attentive to children's individual needs, and as we know, that's best practice in any role involving young children. But when we're slowing down, we're paying a little bit more attention to their individual pace and thinking about how to best engage that child in that moment. For example, some children might respond better to having a detailed introduction to a concept and further explanations because they're their communication and language is of an aptitude that makes sense for them. Whereas others might prefer doing and investigating alone or being accompanied by a friend. And that is a moment of learning that takes a little bit longer to develop because your interaction with the child comes at a later stage. By taking the time to slow down enough to reflect on what you observe, understanding the child's learning, their learning aptitude and the ways in which they acquire their knowledge allow you to improve the opportunities that you create later on for their optimal development. Children's interests are constantly growing. We know this, where children come in one week and it's all about dinosaurs and it's all about rocks and rivers the next. It's a really fascinating and, for me personally, a great experience for working with children because it's constantly growing and you're constantly able to learn new things as well as them. But it's also important to allow children to revisit their ideas and think about them in new ways. This might look like finding new ways to express emotions. It might be about visiting ideas in different environments, such as playing with musical instruments indoors and outdoors where there's different surrounding environment noise. It might be that you are exploring shadows in the summer and in the winter, where it's sunnier and darker. Rain, sun, day and night. There's lots of different alternatives that you can bring to the same learning provision, but give it a very different experience and help to consolidate that understanding in many different ways.
It's also that's right. Sorry, Emily, just going to pop in. This is just to say there that as well, by taking those times, we know that the children's interests are changing all the time. And so a lot of the time we might make assumptions on what we think they're going to like, but it's only by tuning into those slower moments and spending that time with the children that can really inform us of some of the rich opportunities that lie ahead for us. But we have to take that time really to check in with them and see where they're at, what their current interests are. And like you say, sort of experiment with them in different ways as well, because through allowing ourselves to do that, there are so many other opportunities that are there.
Absolutely. And it's not just in those kind of main learning environments. Obviously, every environment is a learning one, but it can often take place in those routines and those care-based practices that we might not consider as much to be a teaching moment. They're very much areas in which we can implement that slow pedagogy through an unhurried everyday routine. So making children aware that they can take their time. We're not rushing about, we're taking time to appreciate that moment and really show those children the importance of that nurture and professional love. This might look a little bit like observations. You might do it through observational work where you're taking more detailed notes for record keeping, allowing you to reflect more on the efficiency of your caregiving system. It might be that you need a little bit more time planned out for nappy changes to ensure a really safe and stimulating interactive environment for each individual child, rather than it feeling like it sometimes can with a conveyor belt of nappy changes before the next activity begins. So when we slow down, we're thinking more intentionally about the meaning of our interactions, whether it be a care-based routine, a transitional routine, which we'll come on to in a little bit, or one of those learning moments that you've planned out in a provision specifically for that child. But it's about taking time to share a special value that might have otherwise been missed had we stayed completely focused on that end goal. Instead, we're utilising the unique nature of that process, the interaction that changes every single day, and the moments of learning throughout it to really engage those children on a deeper level to promote those valuable learning opportunities. So it's all well and good knowing what slowing down means, but how can we actually do it? And when we think about slowing down, it can often be quite difficult to do when you're in a fast-paced environment with lots of children. It might be that you're on quite a rigid routine from a time basis and a logistical point of view. It could be that you've got other priorities that need to take place as well. But some of the ways that we can do it may look very different dependent on the age groups you work with. For example, care routines, as I've mentioned previously, if you're working in a baby room or with preschoolers, reception classes, they're all very different in their elements of care, but each one involves creating an environment where children feel safe and nurtured. So by being able to slow down those interactions and really kind of reflect across our practice, we're not just creating an environment for those learning opportunities, but also on an emotional level, we're telling those children that we recognise their need and that they're valued in that time, that those care routines are something that they're an active participant of, that they are part of as an active doing with rather than doing to, a job to be ticked. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Oh.
I was just agreeing.
I thought you were going to jump in.
No.
But many of those care routines involve moments of one-to-one care and intimacy. So it might be in a baby room, as I was, the bottle feeding, the nappy changing. They're really quite intimate care routines where it is practitioner and child rather than a group setting. But this is a great opportunity to harness for conversation and having that one-to-one engagement that is really crucial for language development, for developing familiarity, for engaging in relationships and building those meaningful moments in spaces where children might be feeling quite vulnerable. You're creating a real welcoming sense of relationship development and care. Another area to slow down might be around transitions. So there's a lot of attention given to the bigger transitions like starting at a new setting or moving rooms or maybe even starting school. But the everyday transitions are often something that can go unrecognised for how significant they are to small children. Changes in the day's routine, whether they're planned or not, moving from locations, seeing new faces can all be transitions that we do without thinking as adults, but children have a real impact. And by slowing down our approach to them, it allows us to reflect on what the child's experiences might be as well, creating that sense of empathy and allowing us to reflect on our practice to meet the best needs of the child themselves. We can do this by looking at all of the vast learning opportunities that come with those different transitions. When walking up and down stairs, you might count with the children, or you might spend some extra time getting ready for the garden so that they can practice their own fine motor skills of getting zips done up and putting gloves on, for example, allowing children to really take independence and harness those real life experiences. It might also be around the conversations that we have with adults. As we have seen in many areas of research and plenty of the resources we provide as part of the Institute, the home learning environment and the partnerships that we engage with parents and carers are crucial to a full, well-rounded, holistic development of the child. Slow pedagogy is about encouraging that reflection, those observations, and actually, what's the point of doing them if we're not passing them on to the people who need it most? Creating and facilitating meaningful conversations with adults during handover times to those at home allows us to facilitate a real consistency between what the child experiences and knows at home compared to it in a formal setting like a nursery setting or in a school-based provision. So where possible, take time to include children in the conversation, allowing them to convey those interests and adding your observations in to support that development. The more the conversation that is led by the child with their parents and carers and between you helps them to feel seen and valued in that conversation and partnership. It shows more of their interests, what was important to them throughout the day, and it keeps the child at the centre of that entire process, which is exactly what we aim to do. As well as this, it's about the conversations that you create with children during their play. Playtimes can be imaginative, they can be high energy, they can be something that children really want to engage with each other. It's their own world, and sometimes adults are excluded from that. But when we do have the privilege of being involved as educators in that playful learning, the conversations that we provide rich opportunities to extend on that valuable learning and create a stimulating environment that challenges those children to thrive together. So take time to ask questions and hear the child's thoughts. This isn't just about building healthy relationships and the moments of vocabulary, but it also gives you an insight into what they're thinking and ways to expand their interests, just as we do with the reflection and observations as we talked about earlier. It can be frustrating sometimes to see a child fail at their objective, particularly if they're showing emotional frustration around it. But it's also a really important learning curve. So whilst it's tempting to provide that little bit more help than might be necessary, taking a step back to allow children to get things wrong, it's okay. We aren't in a rush for children to start a project, to follow through with one idea because of the help that's given and succeed straight away, because that's not what life is about. Providing those experiences for children to experience failure and understand that mistakes can be made in a healthy way is producing a real resilience and a sense of problem solving, allowing them to think about their solutions in a really collaborative way with you possibly or with children around them, but provides a platform for making those mistakes and knowing that it's okay to do so.
Thank you, Emily. There's so much to think about there. And I think one of the key things there that just jumps out at me is when you said, the importance of being with rather than, doing things with the children rather than to them. And I think that is something that, because we are so time bound all of the time, we have hectic routines and schedules and timetables to adhere to. It is difficult sometimes to just allow ourselves to just relax when we are with the children. To do it with them rather than to them, because like you've said about having the conveyor belt, that's the reality, we know that, but it's getting that balance of how can we just build in more of that quality time with, because by allowing ourselves to do that, it kind of feels like sometimes a more effective use of time. We talk about like false economy sometimes of how we use our time. If we're rushing through things, are the children actually getting anything out of that experience, or is it just a case of you're rushing through it so that at the end of the day you can say, I've ticked everything off on my list? And it's really trying to make sure that we get that balance right of doing the things that have to be done. Obviously, we know that the reality of the essentials that need to get done through the day, but just allowing ourselves sometimes just to take a breath and think, right, I can make this a much more enriching experience by just pausing and slowing down a little bit. So I think this is probably a nice time for us to just pause ourselves and reflect and think, has there been a time today where you might have been able to slow down? Have you been working to the clock, which we are typically, but has there been an opportunity where actually you could have parked something and said, you know what, I'm going to leave that to wait, because right now I'm having a really good quality conversation with this group of children, and this is going to lead to another crucial element of learning. So just take a moment and think, if today or this week there is a time where you think, actually, I probably could have done that slower. And then just pause to reflect and think of, well, actually, what might have happened differently if you'd have allowed yourself to slow down in that moment? What could have happened differently? Had you paused and slowed down, would there have been a massive impact in how the children had responded, or not? Because actually sometimes it might not be, that effective to slow things down. It's more effective to keep at pace. But if you'd have taken that moment that you've identified, would it have helped? Would it have benefited the children in any way? Would it have benefited you? I think that's something that we must always be conscious of, is that if we are rushed and the children tune into that sense of urgency that you have got going on, children feed into that. We talk all the time about trying to look after our children's mental health and well-being and those around us. Well, if we are rushed and we are kind of displaying signs of feeling stressed and under pressure, that feeds into the children, and that's also then taken away from some of the quality of their experience with you in that day. And if you just think again where you might have typically liked to have slowed down and done things differently, what was it that stopped you from being able to do that? Was it something more literal in the sense that that it's your room, it's their turn to have their lunch at 11:45, and the cook needs you to be ready there and then at that time. So something like that, where it's set, that's going to be different. That's not necessarily going to give you the flexibility to be able to slow down and engage in those slower pedagogical moments. But if it's something that was a little bit more easy for you to control and be flexible with, then perhaps that's something you need to consider moving forward. So it might be useful to now, on reflection of what we talked about today, to take some time to chat with colleagues to identify any opportunities for you to incorporate some slower pedagogies based on the existing routines and timetables that you have. As I mentioned earlier, we did talk in our last webinar about how important it is for us, well, at the start of the year, making changes, but it's really important for us to start small when we are trying to change a habit or to change a practice. So it's important that you are careful not to try to change too much all at once, or you might be at risk of not changing anything at all. So be realistic about things. Perhaps just focus on one small way that you can build in a slower pedagogical approach and try to keep a track of that. So again, I know, Emily, you mentioned about the transitions. So it could be a simple way to get started would be to think about one of those transitional times that you have regularly throughout the day or throughout the week, and relieve yourself of the time pressures associated with that transition. So if, for example, like I say, if your timetable to have your lunch at 11:45 and you know, for example, that the hand washing routines that the children engage in before that, if that normally takes about 10 minutes for all children to do that, perhaps there's a way of maybe trying to stop your morning session a little bit sooner so that, you know, even if it's just by a couple of minutes, that you can aim to start the hand washing process a little bit sooner. That might then help that activity, that experience to become more calmer. It might allow a little bit of extra time for those informal conversations that we've talked about, more time for the children to wash their hands with greater independence. Could even give you that little bit of extra time for the children to have fun and explore the bubbles that they're creating with their hands when they're washing. So just really think about what's already going on. Are there any simple, quick wins that we could try and do and track regularly? And then once you've got going with one of those little adaptations, then maybe think about, are there other opportunities now that we can tap into as well? You know, I love your example, Emily, even about, you know, the end of the day, the importance of those conversations with our parents and carers. And I think actually sometimes that can be a little bit easier to facilitate, particularly as we get even closer to the end of the day, because there are less and less children. The numbers of children that are left with us in setting at the end of the day continue to reduce. So even though you might be feeling tireder, it's quieter and it might be easier for you to have some of those conversations. So yeah, take some time from this today, have those conversations with colleagues, really reflect on your current routines and see if there is a way you can maybe just slow things down a little. And in terms of other next steps now, just do remember that if you are a member, you can log your CPD points on your own account page. So if you go to My CPD, you'll be able to log the time for today's webinar. And also do book onto your place for our next webinar, which is coming up next Wednesday in association with Children's Mental Health and Wellbeing Week, where we're inviting our guest speaker, Emily Caton, to talk about how physical health can contribute to children's mental health and wellbeing and ways that we can support that as well. And do remember also to share your thoughts and experiences with other like-minded professionals in our member exclusive forum too. So all that's left for me to do now is just to say a huge thank you, Emily, for having this discussion today. You've given me plenty of things to think about in terms of just slowing things down in my own personal life as well. And yeah, so some really good thought-provoking discussion there. So thank you so much, and we'll see you all soon. Bye.
Then bye.